The Arby's restaurant in Chandler, Arizona, bustled with the usual lunchtime crowd. An old man named Doug Parker sat alone at his usual table by the window. This table was his solitary island. Doug was a portrait of consistency. His lunchtime presence was as predictable as the ticking of the clock on the wall. As time went by, a vigilant employee realized something was off, and what she discovered and did will melt your heart. Doug was a man who carried the weight of 97 years. His demeanor was always calm, and his movements were measured and deliberate. He would place his order without looking at the menu, and then gaze out of the window with a faraway look in his eyes. Christina was a young manager of Arby's. She found herself increasingly intrigued by this enigmatic figure. There was something about Doug's routine, the way he savored his meal, and his quiet contemplation that sparked both her curiosity and concern. Each day, as she watched him from behind the counter, a myriad of questions danced in her mind. Why did he choose Arby's every day? What thoughts occupied his mind as he gazed out of the window? Doug's presence had become a part of the restaurant's atmosphere. His lunchtime visits became as familiar as the aroma of roast beef and freshly brewed coffee. Yet, despite his regular visits, he remained a mystery to Christina and the staff. As she observed him one day, something stirred in Christina's heart. It was a blend of empathy and an earnest desire to understand the silent stories behind those aged eyes. Little did she know this curiosity was about to lead her down a path that would unravel the tapestry of a life both extraordinary and poignant. Day after day, as the midday sun cast its rays through the windows of the Arby's, Doug Parker arrived. Like a character from a well-rehearsed play, he entered precisely as the clock chimed 12. His arrival was as inevitable as the sunrise. He would always choose the same table, a little spot by the window where the light was just right. Once seated, he would carefully adjust his chair, aligning it perfectly with the table. This was an act of precision that seemed to hold significant meaning to him. His order never varied. It was always the beef slider with Swiss cheese and a Coca-Cola without ice. But then, Doug began to introduce a subtle, intricate ritual around his meal. As Christina watched, her curiosity piqued. Doug meticulously rearranged the condiments and silverware on the table. Each item had its place, and he would adjust them with a deliberate, almost ceremonial care. The salted pepper shakers were aligned parallel to the edge of the table, the napkin folded into a precise rectangle, and the ketchup bottle always turned to face north. This particularity in his behavior was intriguing. It was as if each item and its placement held a story. Christina thought these rituals were a comfort to Doug, possibly a way to exert control in a world that perhaps felt too unpredictable. Or maybe they were echoes of a past life. Maybe they were remnants of a time and place where such precision was necessary. Each day, as she watched Doug perform his silent ritual, Christina felt a growing connection to this solitary figure. She realized that his actions were not just habits, they were expressions of an untold history, and she was determined to decipher it. As the days turned into weeks, Christina's curiosity about Doug Parker deepened into a quiet obsession. Each lunchtime, as she watched him from the counter, her mind wove intricate theories about the life he led outside the walls of Arby's. Then, one afternoon, Christina turned to her staff to ask them if anyone knew anything about Mr. Parker. The staff exchanged glances and shrugged. They all knew Doug by sight. After all, he was a fixture of the restaurant. But no one could offer anything beyond superficial observations. It was during one of these exchanges that Ethel Fishman, another regular patron known for her keen eye and love for local gossip, chimed in. "I've seen him talking to himself sometimes," she whispered. "It's like he's having a conversation with someone who isn't there." Christina's mind raced with possibilities. Was he reminiscing with ghosts of the past, rehearsing conversations never had? Or, perhaps, was there a more poignant reason for his self-dialogue? One crisp afternoon, as Doug sat at his usual table, lost in his world of silent contemplation, Christina found the courage to approach him. Her heart drummed. "May I join you for a moment, Mr. Parker?" she asked gently. Doug looked up, His eyes were full of surprise and caution. He nodded slowly. Christina took the seat opposite him, acutely aware of the significance of this moment. Her first attempts at conversation were met with monosyllabic responses, but Christina was undeterred. Day after day, she persisted. She would ask him about the weather and the food, small, safe topics that slowly chipped away at the walls he had built. As the days turned into weeks, Doug began to thaw. His reticence melted under the warmth of Christina's sincere interest. His replies grew longer, and a few words blossomed into sentences. He spoke of simple things at first, the quality of his meal, a comment on the sunny weather, the small joys of his daily life. As Christina listened, her heart swelled. She noticed a change in Doug's demeanor during these conversations. His eyes, once distant, now held a flicker of something akin to relief. It was as if her company eased a burden he had long carried alone. Christina's approach had begun to bridge the gap between them. Soon, the newfound rapport between Christina and Doug settled into a comfortable rhythm. But one day, this harmony was unexpectedly disrupted. It was a day like any other, with Doug seated at his usual table. The sunlight cast a familiar glow on his weathered face. However, the air soon thickened with a palpable tension. Midway through his meal, Doug suddenly stopped eating. His hand, which had been lifting a half-eaten beef slider to his lips, trembled and then stilled. Without a word, he pushed back his chair. Its legs scraped against the floor in a harsh, discordant sound that sliced through the usual hum of the restaurant. Christina, who had been observing from a distance, felt a surge of concern. Doug's abrupt departure, leaving his meal unfinished, was an alarming deviation from his unchanging routine. His face was etched with distress. Christina hurried from behind the counter and followed Doug out of the restaurant. She saw Doug's retreating figure moving with an uncharacteristic haste down the street. She quickened her pace. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement as she tried to keep up with the man. Doug's figure became smaller, blended into the crowd, and then dissolved into the sea of people. Christina was breathless and a little bewildered. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What had caused Doug's sudden distress? Where had he gone in such a hurry? In the aftermath of Doug's sudden and mysterious departure, Christina grappled with a whirlwind of concern. The image of his distressed expression haunted her. Driven by a blend of worry and determination, she decided to delve into Doug's past. Her first step was a deep dive into the local archives and online resources. She was looking for any thread that could lead her to understand Doug better. Hours turned into days. She sifted through records and articles, her eyes scanning for any mention of Doug Parker. It was during this meticulous search that she stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. Doug was a war veteran. This man had served his country with honor, but now lived a life shrouded in solitude. The revelation of Doug's military past opened a new window into his world. Christina's heart swelled with respect and empathy for the old man who carried the scars of war, both visible and invisible. Determined to learn more, Christina's research led her to a local veteran group that Doug was part of. With a mix of nervousness and resolve, she decided to visit them. She hoped to glean more insight into Doug's life and perhaps understand the reason behind his sudden distress. Christina was greeted by faces marked with the same blend of resilience and weariness she had seen in Doug. She introduced herself, explaining her connection to Doug and her desire to understand and help him. The veterans listened. Their expressions were a tapestry of understanding and shared experiences. As they spoke of Doug, a picture began to form of a man who had faced the horrors of war, who had lost comrades and friends, and who had returned to a world that felt alien and lonely. They shared stories of Doug's bravery, his kindness, his quiet strength, and his unspoken pain. Christina listened. Her heart grew heavy with the weight of Doug's unshared burdens. She realized that Doug's daily visits to Arby's were more than just a routine. They were a lifeline, a connection to a world that had left him behind. Armed with this new understanding, Christina felt a renewed determination to reach out to Doug. She wanted to offer him support and companionship. In the softly lit hall where the veterans gathered, a sense of camaraderie and shared understanding filled the air. Christina felt both like an outsider and a welcomed guest. She sat among the group with her eyes fixed on Doug. He was there, looking more at ease among his fellow veterans. His weathered face seemed softer, less guarded. The meeting unfolded with stories of bravery, loss, and survival, tales that wove a tapestry of sacrifice and resilience. Then, the moment arrived for Doug to speak. He stood up. His frame was stoic, yet trembled with a vulnerability that he seldom showed. Christina's heart pounded in anticipation and empathy. She knew that the revelations about to come would be the key to understanding the enigma that was Doug Parker. Doug's voice, when he began to speak, was a low rumble. He talked about his time in the service, the friends he'd lost, and the harsh realities of war. But then, his story took a turn, delving into a more personal struggle that he had carried silently for years. He revealed to the group a stomach disorder he had developed. It was a lasting scar from his years in the military. This condition severely limited what he could eat. It turned each meal into a potential minefield of pain and discomfort. But, he shared, there was one place where he could eat without fear, without pain: Arby's. The revelation struck Christina like a bolt of clarity. Doug's daily visits, his specific orders, his meticulous routine, they were all coping mechanisms, ways to manage his condition and hold on to a semblance of normalcy. Arby's was not just a restaurant for Doug. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could nourish himself without suffering. At that moment, Christina's mission became clear. She understood that her role in Doug's life was more than just a manager or a curious observer. She was to be a friend, an ally, someone who could offer comfort and understanding in the small ways that mattered. In the days following the veterans' meeting, a new sense of purpose filled Christina. She shared Doug's story with her staff at Arby's. Moved by his story, the staff, led by Christina, decided to do something special for Doug, a gesture to show their appreciation and support. Pooling their resources, the staff collectively gathered $200. It was a modest sum, but one that represented their collective gratitude and respect. They placed the money in a bright red envelope and then discreetly slipped it into Doug's order between his beef slider and Coca-Cola. The moment Doug opened the envelope and saw the contents, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. His eyes widened in disbelief. His face registered a mix of shock and confusion. For a moment, he simply stared at the money, as if trying to piece together the puzzle before him. Then, realization dawned on his face. It was followed by a wave of emotion. His eyes, often distant, now shimmered with unshed tears. A soft "oh" escaped his lips. Doug looked up. His gaze swept across the faces of the staff. Christina stepped forward. Her own eyes were now wet with tears. "It's just a small token of our appreciation, Mr. Parker," she said softly. "You're not just a customer here. You're part of our Arby's family." Doug's response was another choked-up whisper, "Thank you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of profound gratitude. The gesture had touched a part of him long closed off. At that moment, as he held the red envelope, Doug Parker was not just a solitary war veteran. He was a cherished member of a community that had quietly, yet powerfully, embraced him. The act of kindness towards Doug Parker did not go unnoticed. Among the customers at Arby's that day was a local blogger who, touched by the scene, snapped a photo and shared Doug's story on social media. The post detailed Doug's military service and his struggles with a stomach disorder. It told of the compassionate gesture of the Arby staff. The story resonated with people far and wide. Like a spark igniting a fire, the story spread across the internet. It touched hearts and inspired a wave of admiration and support for Doug. The post went viral, with thousands of shares, likes, and comments. People from all walks of life were moved by Doug's resilience and the kindness shown by Christina and her team. The story encapsulated a beautiful narrative of community support, empathy, and the power of small acts of kindness. It wasn't long before the story caught the attention of local news outlets, who were eager to share this heartwarming tale with a wider audience. As Doug's story gained momentum, it eventually reached the corporate headquarters of Arby's. Touched by the loyalty of a longtime customer and the compassionate action of their employees, the executives at Arby's decided to honor Doug in a grand gesture. They announced that Doug Parker would receive free lunches at any Arby's restaurant for the rest of his life. The news was conveyed to Doug during one of his regular visits. Christina, alongside her team, presented him with an official letter from Arby's headquarters. Doug, who had always maintained a stoic demeanor, was visibly moved. His eyes often reflected a deep-seated solitude, but they now sparkled with a mix of surprise, gratitude, and joy. "I don't know what to say. Thank you," Doug murmured. This unprecedented gesture from Arby's was more than just about free meals. It was a recognition of his life's journey, a validation of his existence, and a symbol of a community's unwavering support. Doug's humble story was a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places can become stages for extraordinary acts of kindness. This extraordinary story serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of caring for our veterans, those who have selflessly served and sacrificed for our freedoms. Doug's journey underscores the significance of acknowledging their struggles, both seen and unseen, and it also speaks of the powerful impact of extending a hand of support. It's a call to action for communities and individuals alike to recognize and honor our veterans, not just with words, but through meaningful gestures that convey our deep appreciation for their service. As Doug's story beautifully illustrates, even the smallest act of kindness can resonate profoundly in the hearts of those who have given so much. And it reinforces the idea that our veterans are not forgotten, but are cherished and valued members of our society. Okay, I have to admit, I shed a tear. What a wonderful story about listening to our better angels. If you have a heartwarming story about a vet, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear. For now though, that's taps for us. Catch you in the next video.